Sarah Martinez walked fast through the big glass doors of Pinnacle Financial Tower, and her high heels made loud sounds on the shiny floor as she carried many papers in one hand and hot coffee in the other hand, and checked her phone with her free fingers because she was already 20 minutes late for work on her second Tuesday at the new job, and everything seemed to go wrong this morning, starting with her alarm clock that did not ring, and then her car that would not start, and then the bus that came 15 minutes late, and now she had to rush to the 15th floor to make copies of 200 contracts before her 9 o'clock meeting with the big bosses who would decide if she was good enough to keep her new job as senior marketing director. The elevator took so long to come, and when it finally arrived there were already 6 people inside, and they all looked at her like she was crazy because she was breathing hard and her hair was messy and she had coffee stains on her jacket, but she did not care because she just needed to get to her floor and make those copies and get ready for the most important presentation of her life. So far, when the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, Sarah ran to her desk and grabbed all the papers she needed and then went straight to the copy machine in the corner near the big windows. But when she got there, she saw the machine had a bright red light flashing and words on the screen that said error, error, error. And there was a man standing next to it with his hands inside the machine, and he wore old blue jeans with holes in the knees and a gray shirt that looked like it had been washed too many times, and his sleeves were rolled up and there was black stuff on his fingers, and his hair looked like he had been working hard all morning. Sarah looked at her watch and saw it was already 8:45, which meant she had only 15 minutes to make 200 copies and get ready for her meeting. And this man was taking his time fixing the machine like he had all day to do it, and she felt her heart beating fast and her hands getting sweaty because everything was going wrong, and she needed this job so much because she had been looking for work for 6 months after her last company closed down, and she had bills to pay and rent to pay and food to buy. She walked up to the man and tapped her foot on the floor to make noise so he would know she was there, and said, "Excuse me," in a voice that was not very nice because she was stressed and worried and running out of time. And the man looked up at her with brown eyes that seemed kind, but she did not notice that because she was too busy being angry about the broken machine. "How long is this going to take?" she asked while looking at her watch again and tapping her foot faster. And the man said, "Just a few more minutes," and his voice was calm and quiet, like he was not worried about anything. And this made Sarah even more angry because he did not understand that she had important work to do and could not wait around all day for him to fix one stupid machine. Sarah looked around the office and saw other people working at their desks and talking on phones and typing on computers and having normal mornings, while she stood there watching this slow maintenance man work on the copier, and she felt like screaming because nothing was going right, and she had worked so hard to get this job, and now it might all fall apart because of a broken copy machine. "I have 200 copies to make before my 9 o'clock presentation," she said, and her voice was getting louder, and some people at nearby desks looked up to see what was happening, but she did not care because she was desperate and scared and running out of time. And the man just nodded and kept working with his hands inside the machine and said he understood and would work as fast as he could. Sarah paced back and forth behind him like a cat in a cage and checked her phone every 30 seconds and looked at the elevator, hoping maybe someone from the office management would come and bring another copy machine or tell this slow worker to hurry up. But nobody came, and the man just kept working quietly and carefully like he was fixing the most important machine in the world. "Can't you just call for a replacement machine or something?" Sarah asked, and she knew her voice sounded mean, but she could not help it because she was so worried about her presentation and what the bosses would think if she showed up with no copies and no materials and looking like she could not handle simple office tasks. And the man looked up at her again with those same calm brown eyes and said he was sorry, but this was the only copy machine on this floor, and he needed to fix it properly so it would work right. Sarah felt tears starting to come to her eyes because everything was so hard and unfair, and she had been trying so hard to make a good impression at her new job, but instead she was standing there arguing with a janitor about a copy machine while precious minutes ticked away, and her big presentation got closer and closer, and she had no idea what she was going to do if the machine did not Start working soon. The man seemed to notice that she was upset because he worked a little faster and made different sounds with the tools he was using, and Sarah could hear papers moving inside the machine and mechanical noises that sounded like maybe he was making progress, but she could not be sure because she did not know anything about copy machines except how to push the green button and hope they work. She looked at her reflection in the big windows and saw that her hair was still messy and her makeup was smudged from the stress of the morning, and her jacket still had those coffee stains from when she spilled her drink in the elevator, and she realized she looked terrible and unprofessional. And even if the copy machine started working, she still had a lot of problems to solve before her. Presentation 852 said the numbers on her phone screen, and Sarah felt panic rising in her chest like cold water because she had only 8 minutes left, and even if the machine started working right now, she would still need at least 10 minutes to make all the copies and organize them and fix her appearance and get to the conference room where the bosses were waiting to judge her work and decide her future. This is exactly what I don't need today, Sarah said out loud, and she was talking more to herself than to the maintenance man, but he heard her anyway and looked up with a small smile that seemed understanding and patient, even though she had been rude to him and demanding and treating him like he was not important just because he wore old clothes and worked with his hands instead of sitting at a desk in expensive suits like the other men in the building. The man went back to work, and Sarah could hear him moving things around inside the machine, and then suddenly the red error light stopped flashing and the screen changed to show normal words instead of error messages, and she heard the machine make the humming sound that meant it was ready to work again, and she felt such relief that she almost cried with happiness. Sarah felt so happy when the copy machine started working again that she almost forgot to thank the man who fixed it. And she just said thanks really fast without looking at him because she was already moving toward the machine to start making her copies, and she could see on her phone that it was 8:55, which meant she had exactly 5 minutes to make 200 copies and get to the conference room where her bosses were waiting. She put the first contract into the paper feeder and pressed the buttons to make 50 copies, but something went wrong, and the machine made a terrible grinding noise and then stopped working completely, and the screen showed error messages again, and Sarah felt her heart drop into her stomach because this could not be happening to her when she was so close to being ready for her presentation. The maintenance man was still there putting his tools back into his box, but when he heard the machine making bad noises, he came back over to see what was wrong, and Sarah was pressing buttons and trying to open different parts of the machine to see what happened, but she did not know what she was doing, and she was making everything worse. Let me take a look, the man said in his calm, quiet voice, and Sarah moved away from the machine, but she was so frustrated and scared that she started to cry a little bit because everything was going wrong, and she could not understand why this was happening to her on such an important day when she needed everything to be perfect. The man opened the machine and found that the papers had gotten twisted and stuck in the wrong place, and there was black toner powder spilled all over the inside of the machine, and some of it had gotten on Sarah's white shirt when she was trying to fix it herself, and now she had big black marks across the front of her shirt that looked terrible and unprofessional. Sarah looked down at her shirt and saw the black stains and felt like her whole world was falling apart because not only did she not have her copies ready, but now she looked like she had been rolling around in dirt, and there was no way she could go to her presentation looking like this, and she started crying harder because she felt so helpless. And everything was ruined. Man saw that she was really upset, and he stopped working on the machine and said, "Hey, it's going to be okay," and his voice was so kind and gentle that Sarah looked up at him and saw that he was looking at her with real concern in his brown eyes, like he actually cared about what happened to her, even though she had been rude to him and treated him like he was not important. He went back to working on the machine, and his hands moved very fast, and he seemed to know exactly what to do to fix the problem, and Sarah watched him work and noticed that his movements were very precise and confident, like he had fixed many machines before and was really good at his job, even though she had assumed he was just some slow janitor who did not know what he was doing. Within 3 minutes, the machine was working again, and the man showed Sarah how to put the papers in the right way so they would not get stuck, and he helped her organize all her contracts in the right order so she could make copies of everything she needed, and the machine worked perfectly and made all 200 copies in just 2 minutes. But Sarah still had the problem of her ruined shirt with the big black stains across the front, and she looked at her phone and saw it was 9 o'clock exactly, which meant her presentation was supposed to start right now, and she was not ready and did not look professional, and she felt like giving up and going home and never coming back to this job. The man must have seen how upset she was about her shirt, because he looked around and then walked over to a chair near the windows where there was a navy blue jacket hanging, and Sarah had not noticed it before because she was so focused on the copy machine, but now she saw it was a really nice jacket that looked expensive and well made. He picked up the jacket and brought it over to Sarah and said, "Take this, and it might be a bit big, but it will cover the stains." And Sarah looked at the jacket and then at the man and said, "I cannot take your jacket, because what will your supervisor say when he sees you do not have it?" And the man just smiled and said, "Do not worry about it," and pushed the jacket toward her hand. Sarah took the jacket and put it on, and it was too big for her, but it was made of really good material, and it smelled clean and fresh like expensive cologne. And when she looked at herself in the window, she saw that it completely covered the toner stains on her shirt and actually made her look more professional and put together than she had looked all morning. The jacket was so nice that Sarah started to wonder about this maintenance man, because most janitors and repair workers did not wear jackets that felt this expensive and looked this well made, and she thought maybe he had bought it at a secondhand store, or maybe it was a gift from someone. But she did not have time to think about it too much, because she needed to get to her presentation. "Good luck with your presentation," the man said as he picked up his toolbox and started to walk away, and Sarah called after him to ask what his name was, because she wanted to make sure she could find him later to return his jacket. But he just waved and said, "Do not worry about it," and kept walking toward the elevator. Sarah gathered up all her copies and organized them in neat piles and checked her appearance in the window one more time and saw that she actually looked pretty good in the navy jacket, and her hair had settled down and she had wiped off the smudged makeup, so she looked professional and ready for her presentation. Even though she was now 5 minutes late, she hurried to the conference room and found her boss, Linda Chun, and 3 other executives sitting around the big table waiting for her. And Linda looked at her watch and raised her eyebrows, but Sarah apologized for being late and said there had been some technical difficulties with the copy machine, and everyone nodded like they understood, because office equipment problems happen to everyone sometimes. Sarah started her presentation and everything went much better than she had expected, because all her ideas were good and she had prepared well, and the copies looked professional, and the executives asked good questions and seemed interested in her marketing strategies, and she felt confident and smart wearing the nice navy jacket that made her feel like she belonged in the room with important business people. During her presentation, Sarah kept thinking about the kind maintenance man who had helped her when everything was going wrong, and she felt bad about how rude she had been to him when he was just trying to do his job and help her. And she decided that after her presentation was over, she would find him and thank him properly, and maybe buy him lunch or coffee to show her appreciation. The presentation lasted for 45 minutes, and when it was over, the executives clapped and told Sarah that her ideas were excellent and exactly what the company needed. And Linda Chin smiled at her and said she had done a great job, and Sarah felt so happy and relieved that she almost started crying again, but this time from joy instead of frustration. After everyone left the conference room, Sarah sat alone for a few minutes and looked down at the navy jacket she was wearing and felt the good quality material between her fingers, and noticed that there was something in the inside pocket that felt like a small hard object, and she wondered what it was, but did not want to look through someone else's jacket pockets without permission. She decided she needed to find the maintenance man as soon as possible to return his jacket and thank him for saving her presentation, and maybe find out more about who he was, because something about him seemed different from other building workers she had met, and she was curious about why he had been so kind to a stranger who had treated him badly. Sarah walked back to her desk feeling like she was floating on air, because her presentation had gone so much better than she had ever imagined possible, and all the executives had smiled and nodded and asked smart questions about her marketing Ideas, and Linda Chun had even said that Sarah brought exactly the kind of fresh thinking the company needed, and that she was impressed with how well Sarah handled the technical problems that morning. The navy jacket felt like a good luck charm on her shoulders, and Sarah kept touching the soft material and thinking about how different her morning could have been if that kind maintenance man had not helped her fix the copy machine and then given her his own jacket to cover the ugly black stains on her white shirt, and she realized that without his help, she would probably be cleaning out her desk right now. Instead of celebrating a successful presentation, other people in the office started coming over to congratulate Sarah because word had spread quickly that the new marketing director had impressed all the big bosses in her presentation, and everyone wanted to know what her secret was, and Sarah felt proud but also grateful because she knew the real secret was the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had helped her when she was at her lowest point. Linda Chun stopped by Sarah's desk around lunchtime and sat down in the chair next to her and said that the executives had been talking about Sarah's presentation all morning, and they were very excited about implementing her marketing strategies, and that Sarah should expect to have more responsibility and bigger projects in the coming weeks, and maybe even a promotion if she continued to do such good work. Sarah thanked Linda and said she was excited to take on more challenges, but then Linda noticed the jacket Sarah was wearing and said that it looked really expensive and professional, and asked where Sarah had gotten it because it looked like something from one of those fancy stores downtown that sold clothes for executives and business leaders. Sarah felt her cheeks get red because she realized she had been wearing someone else's jacket all morning, and she had to explain to Linda that there had been an accident with the copy machine and a maintenance worker had been kind enough to lend her his jacket to cover some stains, and Linda raised her eyebrows and said that was very unusual because most building workers did not own jackets that looked that expensive. This made Sarah curious too, because now that she thought about it, the jacket did feel and look much nicer than anything she would expect a janitor or repairman to own, and she started wondering who this mysterious helper really was, and why he had such expensive clothes, and why he had been so willing to help a rude stranger who had treated him poorly. During her lunch break, Sarah decided to examine the jacket more carefully to see if she could find any clues about who it belonged to, and she went to the empty conference room where she could have some privacy and slowly felt around in all the pockets to see what she might find without being too nosy or invasive. In the left outside pocket she found nothing, but in the right outside pocket there was the expensive-looking pen that felt heavy and solid, like real gold or silver, and had initials engraved on the side that said MC in fancy letters, and Sarah wondered what those letters stood for and whether they were the initials of the man who had helped her. The inside pockets were more interesting because in the left one she found what felt like a small leather wallet or card holder, and when she carefully pulled it out she saw it was made of the finest black leather she had ever touched and had gold corners and looked like something that would cost more money than Sarah made in a week. Sarah's hands were shaking a little as she opened the card holder because she felt like she was snooping, but also because she was starting to realize that this jacket belonged to someone much more important than a building maintenance worker, and she was scared about what she might find inside. The first thing she saw was a business card that was made of thick cream-colored paper with gold letters that were raised up from the surface, and when she read the name on the card, she felt like someone had hit her in the stomach with a baseball bat, because the card said Marcus Caldwell, Chief Executive, Officer Caldwell Industries, in beautiful gold letters. Sarah stared at the card for a long time because she could not believe what she was seeing, and she read the name over and over again to make sure she was not making a mistake, and then she looked at the address on the card and saw that it was the same address as the building she was sitting in right now, which meant that Marcus Caldwell worked in this very building. But Marcus Caldwell was not just any executive who worked in the building, because Sarah had heard that name before, and she knew it was the name of one of the richest and most powerful businessmen in the entire city, and that Caldwell Industries owned dozens of buildings and companies, including the company where Sarah worked, and that made Marcus Caldwell her ultimate boss, even though she had never seen him before. Sarah put the business card back in the leather holder with shaking hands and then pulled out her phone to search for information about Marcus Caldwell. on the internet, and what she found made her feel even more confused and shocked because Marcus Caldwell was described as a billionaire who owned more companies than she could count and lived in a huge mansion and flew around in private airplanes. The pictures she found online showed a man in expensive standing next to fancy cars and shaking hands with politicians and celebrities, but most of the photos were taken from far away or at formal events where he was wearing sunglasses or looking away from the camera, and Sarah could not get a clear view of his face to compare it with the maintenance man who had helped her. But the more she thought about it, the more she remembered little details about the man who had fixed the copy machine. And she realized that even though he was dressed like a worker, his hands had been clean, except for the toner from the machine, and his fingernails were neat and trimmed like someone who took care of himself, and his teeth were white and straight, like someone who could afford good dental care. Sarah also remembered that when he talked, his voice was educated and calm, like someone who was used to being in charge and making important decisions, and he had not seemed nervous or intimidated when she was being rude to him like most service workers would have been when dealing with an angry office person. The more Sarah thought about all these clues, the more convinced she became that the kind maintenance man was actually Marcus Caldwell, the billionaire CEO. But that seemed so impossible and crazy that she started to doubt herself and wonder if maybe she was just imagining things. Because she wanted the story to be more interesting than it really was, she spent the rest of her lunch break reading everything she could find about Marcus Caldwell, and learned that he was famous for being very private and for having unusual business methods, including something called management by walking around where he would visit his companies without announcing himself to see how things really worked when the bosses were not watching. Sarah read that Marcus Caldwell believed that the best way to understand a business was to work in it at the lowest levels and talk to regular employees who would tell him the truth about problems and opportunities that managers might not want to admit, and that he sometimes spent weeks working in his own companies under fake names to learn what was really happening. This information made Sarah's heart beat faster because it meant that it was actually possible that the maintenance man really was Marcus Caldwell, and that she had been incredibly rude to one of the most powerful men in the city without knowing it, and that he had still been kind enough to help her when she desperately needed help. Sarah looked at the expensive jacket hanging on her chair and felt a mixture of gratitude and terror, because if the maintenance man really was Marcus Caldwell, then he had seen her at her worst moment when she was stressed and rude and unprofessional, and he probably thought she was a terrible person who did not deserve to work for his company. But he had still helped her fix the copy machine and given her his jacket and wished her good luck with her presentation, which made Sarah think that maybe Marcus Caldwell was a much kinder and more understanding person than she would have expected from someone so rich and powerful, and maybe he judged people by how they handled difficult situations rather than by how perfect they seemed on the surface. Sarah could not sleep that night because her mind kept racing with thoughts about the mysterious maintenance man and whether he really was Marcus Caldwell, the billionaire CEO, and she kept going over every detail of their conversation and wondering how she could have been so rude to someone who turned out to be so important and powerful, and she practiced what she would say to him when she returned his jacket. The next day, she got to work very early the next morning because she wanted to find the man before the office got busy and give him back his jacket and apologize for how she had treated him, and maybe find out for sure if he really was who she thought he was, or if she had just let her imagination run wild and created a crazy story that was not true. Sarah waited by the copy machine for 2 hours, but the man did not appear, and she started to worry that maybe he only came to the 15th floor when there were problems to fix, and since the copier was working fine now, he had no reason to come back, and she might never see him again and never get the chance to return his jacket or thank him properly for his kindness. She asked some of her coworkers if they had seen a maintenance man working on the copy machine the day before, but most of them said they had not noticed anyone, and the few who remembered seeing a man in work clothes said they did not know who he was or when he might come back, because building maintenance workers came and went at different times depending on what needed to be fixed around lunchtime. Sarah decided to take the jacket down to the building management office on the 3rd floor to see if someone there could help her find the maintenance worker who had left it behind, but when she got to the office, the woman behind the desk looked confused when Sarah described the man and said that all the regular maintenance workers were accounted for, and none of them had reported losing a jacket. The woman said that sometimes outside contractors came in to fix special equipment, and maybe the man Sarah was looking for worked for one of those companies, but she would need more information to track him down, and Sarah realized she did not even know the man's name or what company he worked for because she had been too busy being angry about the broken copy machine to ask any questions. Sarah went back to her desk feeling frustrated and worried because she had a very expensive jacket that belonged to someone and she had no way to return it, and she was starting to think that maybe she would never see the kind maintenance man again and would always wonder if he really was Marcus Caldwell or just someone who happened to own nice clothes. She spent the afternoon trying to focus on her work, but every few minutes she would look toward the elevator, hoping to see the man in work clothes walking toward the copy machine, but he never appeared, and Sarah started to feel guilty about keeping his jacket when he had been so generous to help her, and she did not even know how to find him to give it. Back around 4 o'clock, Sarah was sitting at her desk working on a marketing report when she heard the elevator doors open, and she looked up automatically because she had been checking every time someone arrived on the floor, and this time she saw the man she had been looking for walking out of the elevator carrying a small toolbox, just like he had the day before, but something was different about where he came from because Sarah noticed he had come out of the executive elevator, which was the special one that went to the top floors where only the most important people in the company worked, and regular maintenance workers usually used the service elevator that stopped at every floor and was located on the other side of the building. Sarah grabbed the jacket from her chair and walked quickly toward the man before he could disappear again, and as she got closer she noticed more details about him that she had missed the day before because she had been too stressed and focused on her own problems to really look at him carefully. He was wearing the same type of work clothes, but they were clean and new-looking, and his shoes were expensive leather boots that probably cost more than most people spent on work shoes, and he carried himself with confidence like someone who was used to being in charge and making important decisions. The man saw Sarah coming toward him and smiled the same kind, gentle smile she remembered from the day before, and Sarah felt her heart beating fast because she was nervous about talking to him again, especially if he really was Marcus Caldwell, and she had been so rude to him without knowing who he was. "I believe this belongs to you," Sarah said as she held out the navy jacket and tried to keep her voice steady and professional even though her hands were shaking a little, and the man looked at the jacket and then at Sarah and said thank you and asked how her presentation had gone, and Sarah felt a little shock because his question seemed to prove that he had been thinking about her and caring about what happened to her. The simple question made Sarah feel both grateful and embarrassed because it showed that this man really had cared about helping her even though she had treated him badly, and she realized that he must have been wondering all day whether his kindness had made a difference in her life and whether she had been able to succeed in her presentation. "Your presentation," the man said again when Sarah did not answer right away, and his voice was patient and interested like he really wanted to know what had happened, and Sarah found herself telling him that it had gone better than she could have imagined, and that the executives had been very impressed with her ideas, and that she might even get a promotion because of how well everything had worked out. "That's wonderful," the man said, and his smile looked genuine and happy, like he was truly pleased that good things had happened to Sarah, and this made her feel even more curious about who he really was because most strangers would not care so much about the success of someone they had just met. "You knew Sarah?" said suddenly, and the words came out before she could stop them, and the man looked at her with a questioning expression, and Sarah felt her cheeks getting red as she continued. "You knew I thought you were," and then she stopped because she could not figure out how to finish the sentence without sounding stupid or rude. "The janitor," the man finished for her, and his voice was amused but not mean, and Sarah nodded and felt embarrassed but also relieved that he had said it first, so she did not have to, and he continued, "Yes, I figured that out pretty quickly. When you started talking about supervisors and building services," Sarah wanted to ask him directly if he was really Marcus, Caldwell, but she was afraid of what the answer might be, and she was also afraid that if she was wrong, she would look foolish for thinking that a maintenance worker could be a billionaire. So instead she just stood there holding the jacket and trying to think of what to say next. But you seem to need help more than you needed to know who I was, the man continued, and his voice was kind and understanding, and Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes because she realized that this person had seen her at her worst moment when she was desperate and scared, and instead of being offended by her rudeness, he had focused on what she needed and had gone out of his way to help. Harry was so rude to you, Sarah said, and her voice was barely above a whisper because she felt ashamed of how she had acted, and the man shook his head and said, "You were stressed and focused on your work, and that is not a character flaw," and his words made Sarah feel a little better, but she still felt bad about how she had treated someone who had turned out to be so kind and helpful. The man took the jacket from Sarah's hands and put it on, and Sarah noticed that it fit him perfectly and looked natural on him, like it was made for him, and she also noticed that when he moved there was something confident and commanding about his posture that reminded her of the executives she had seen in the conference room during her presentation. "Actually," the man said as he adjusted the jacket, "I have been watching your work since you started here, and Linda Shun speaks very highly of you, and yesterday's presentation confirmed everything she told me about your potential." And when he said this, Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat because this was exactly the kind of thing that Marcus Caldwell, the CEO, would know about a new employee. Sarah stared at the man in the navy jacket and felt like the whole world had suddenly become very quiet and still because his words about watching her work and knowing what Linda Chin had said about her could only mean one thing, and that was that he really was Marcus Caldwell, the billionaire CEO who owned the building and the company and probably half the city, and she had spent 2 days thinking he was just a maintenance worker who fixed copy machines. The man seemed to understand that Sarah had finally figured out who he really was because he smiled and extended his hand toward her and said, "I should probably introduce myself properly, and my name is Marcus Caldwell, and I own this building and the company you work for, and I make it a habit to work incognito in my businesses from time to time to see how things really operate when people think nobody important is watching." Sarah shook his hand and felt like she might faint because his grip was firm and confident, like someone who was used to making million-dollar deals and running huge companies, and she could not believe that this was the same person who had spent 20 minutes patiently fixing a copy machine and then given his expensive jacket to a rude stranger who had treated him like he was invisible. Marcus explained that he had learned more about running successful businesses by working alongside regular employees than he ever could by sitting in boardrooms and reading reports, because when people thought he was just another worker, they told him the truth about what was really happening in his companies and what problems needed to be solved and what opportunities were being missed. He said that most executives never got to see what he had seen yesterday, which was someone working so hard and caring so much about doing a good job that they were almost in tears when things went wrong, and that kind of dedication and passion was exactly what made companies successful and profitable and strong. Sarah felt overwhelmed by everything Marcus was telling her because she had never imagined that someone so rich and powerful would care about the daily struggles of ordinary employees, and she had always thought that billionaire CEOs lived in a completely different world where they never had to worry about broken copy machines or ruined shirts or being late for important meetings. But Marcus seemed to understand exactly what she had been going through that morning, and he talked about how much pressure new employees faced and how important it was for companies to support people when they were learning and growing and trying to prove themselves. And Sarah realized that he had helped her not because he felt sorry for her, but because he recognized her potential and wanted to see her succeed over the next few weeks. Sarah occasionally saw Marcus around the building, still dressed in work clothes and still fixing things and observing how the business operated, and she learned that this was something he did regularly in all of his companies because he believed that good leadership meant understanding every level of the organization from the bottom to the top. Sometimes when Sarah was getting coffee in the break room or waiting for the elevator, Marcus would appear, and they would have brief conversations about her work and her ideas for improving the marketing department, and Sarah was amazed by how much he knew about every aspect of the business and how interested he was in hearing suggestions from employees at all levels. Marcus told Sarah that he had started his business empire 20 years ago with just one small company and had built it into what it was today by always remembering that the most important assets of any business were the people who work there, and that treating employees well and giving them opportunities to grow was the best way to ensure long-term success. Sarah learned that Marcus had grown up in a poor family and had worked many different jobs, including janitor and maintenance worker and factory worker, before he had saved enough money to start his first business, and that he never forgot what it felt like to be treated badly by people who thought they were more important than he was. This explained why Marcus had been so patient and kind when Sarah was being rude to him that first morning, because he remembered what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored by people who judged others based on their clothes or their job titles instead of their character and their potential. Sarah also learned that Marcus made it a point to promote people from within his companies whenever possible, and that many of his top executives had started in entry-level positions and worked their way up because he believed that people who understood the business from the ground up made the best leaders. 3 months after the copy machine incident, Linda Chun called Sarah into her office and told her that she was being promoted to Vice President of Strategic Marketing, which was a position that came with a big salary increase and her own office on the executive floor and access to the special elevator that went to the top floors of the building. Linda explained that the promotion was based on Sarah's excellent work and her innovative ideas and her ability to handle pressure and solve problems, but Sarah suspected that Marcus had something to do with the decision because he had been watching her work and asking her questions and seemed genuinely interested in her career development. When Sarah moved to her new office on the executive floor, she found that it had big windows that looked out over the city and expensive furniture and all the latest technology, and she felt like she had come a very long way from that terrible morning when everything had gone wrong and she had thought her career was over before it had really begun. The best part of her new position was that Sarah now had regular meetings with other executives, including Marcus, who attended the monthly strategic planning sessions where they discussed the future direction of the company and made decisions about new products and services and marketing campaigns. In these meetings, Sarah saw a different side of Marcus because he was wearing expensive suits instead of work clothes, and he spoke with authority and confidence about complex business matters, but she also noticed that he always listened carefully to what other people had to say and never dismissed anyone's ideas without giving them serious consideration. Sarah realized that the morning when Marcus had helped her with the copy machine had taught her something important about leadership and success, which was that the best leaders were people who were willing to get their hands dirty and help others, even when there was nothing in it for them, and who treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position or status. She also learned that success was not just about being smart or talented, but also about being kind and generous and willing to take risks to help other people achieve their goals, and that the most successful companies were built by people who understood that business was ultimately about human relationships and trust. Sarah never forgot the lesson she learned that day about not judging people based on their appearance or their job title, and she made it a point to treat everyone she met with respect and kindness, because she never knew who might turn out to be someone important or who might need help or encouragement at a difficult moment in their life. Years later, when Sarah had become one of the top executives in the company and was responsible for marketing strategies that generated millions of dollars in revenue, she would sometimes tell new employees the story of the morning when she mistook the CEO for a janitor and how his kindness had changed not only her career but also her understanding of what it meant to be a good leader and a good person. The story became famous throughout the company as an example of Marcus Caldwell's unusual management style and his belief that the best way to understand a business was to work in it at every level, and that the most important quality in any employee was not their education or their experience, but their character and their willingness to treat other people with dignity and respect. Sarah kept the memory of that morning as a reminder That success in business and in life came not from being perfect or having all the right answers, but from being willing to accept help when it was offered, and to offer help to others when they needed it, and to always remember that behind every job title and every uniform was a real person with hopes and dreams and struggles just like everyone else.